Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing the second to last alignment chart video, which is going to be the tank items. If you enjoy these alignment chart videos, then be sure to subscribe for the bruiser items alignment chart that will be coming out soon, which will be the last one in the series. But of course, today we have all tank items. The alignment here is going to be early late as usual, and then we're going to have stats utility on the y-axis. I was going to go for like physical magical on the y-axis, but I feel like that's a bit obvious. I think most people know, Heart Ward Amulet's a magical defense item, Sovereignty is a physical defense item, so I decided to go with like, does the item just have a lot of raw stats that make you very tanky, or does it have some utility like giving buffs to your teammates and things like that? And so yeah, let's just jump right in with Breastplate of Valor. So Breastplate of Valor is an early game item, that's for sure. You usually go it like second in like solo lane and things like that. It's usually where this item's picked up. So probably somewhere like here if we're building it like first item after maybe our starter. And then we're looking at mostly stats for this, but the cooldown reduction is definitely some strong utility on it. 20% cooldown is nothing to laugh at. So we'll drop Breastplate of Valor like right there. Bulwark of Hope, a very interesting one, got buffed recently. I think it's actually quite strong in the meta at the moment with the new patch. It's mostly like a later game item, I would say. Magical defense in general, you get a bit later than physical defense because there's less magical damage on the map. It's usually just a mage and like maybe fire giant and a little bit from their guardian and support. So usually you go magical damage a bit later in the game unless the enemy mid's giving you like specific trouble. So I would say this is more of like a late game item. And then in terms of stats versus utility, it's probably on a similar level to Breastplate because the passive is very nice. It does give you that health shield and stuff like that, but Bulwark is mostly just a pile of stats. So we'll leave it like there. Contagion, an interesting one, obviously anti-heal item, so you generally build this like kind of mid-game, I would say, when people start getting their big lifesteal and healing online. So we'll put it kind of somewhere towards the middle. And then in terms of stats utility, it's like probably skewed a little bit towards utility because you mostly buy this for the anti-heal, even though the stats on it are actually not terrible. We have Emperor's Armor. So this is generally one you build later because structures aren't like super in play in the early game. It's generally like the mid game you'll buy this, or maybe the late game if you're having trouble breaking your siege in Conquest or something like that. And this item is generally like utility skewed, I would say, because you're mostly buying this for the passive to destroy those towers. Granted, similar to Contagion, the base stats on the item are actually okay for the cost anyway, but you're generally buying this so you can take down towers. And then, is it more late game than a Bulwark? It's probably on a very similar level, I would say. Maybe Bulwark's slightly more early game, so we'll put Bulwark like there and drop Emperor's Armor just there. Gauntlet of Thebes, obviously a very early game item. Most supports, if you're gonna go Gauntlet of Thebes, they buy it like first, so we'll put it like all the way over here. And then in terms of stats utility, it's mostly a pile of stats, this Gauntlet of Thebes. But it does give like a small amount of AoE protections, I think it's 10 to your allies, so there is a little bit of utility there, so we won't put it all the way at the top. Genji's Guard, kind of an interesting one. Once again, it's magical defense. Magical defense generally gets built later because like solo laners building defense don't go magical until super late in the game because they don't usually have to deal with the mid laner all that much. Obviously, this is game dependent. Sometimes you go magical defense first if like you're against a Guardian or an Alquang or something like that. So probably somewhere around here is fine for that. And then in terms of stats utility, it gives cooldown, it gives a lot of MP5. Probably a similar amount of utility to Bulwark, maybe slightly less, so we'll put it like there. Heart Ward Amulet, generally built kind of like mid to late game if your team are having big trouble with magical damage, so somewhere around where Genji's Guard is at actually. And then in terms of utility, probably a little bit more utility than Genji's Guard, but not by much. Because obviously this gives like protections to your teammates as well as MP5, so like probably a better aura than Genji's Guard, I would say. Maybe we'll move Genji's up slightly actually. And then we have Heart Ward like right there. Hide of the Nemean Lion. So once again, generally built a bit later into the game because you want like some actual defense items online before you buy this because the amount of block stack scales based on your protections from items. So you want to be building this like 4th, 5th, or 6th in your build generally. So we'll put it somewhere around like where you build Emperor's Armor. And then stats utility. The block stacks are very undervalued actually. Block stacks are super strong. So like the utility is actually solid on this. Maybe it's just like somewhere right in the middle because it does have stats, but it also has like those very powerful block stacks on the passive. Hide of the Urchin. So generally like an early to mid game item. Hide of the Urchin, you're going like 3rd, maybe 2nd if you're very greedy, maybe 4th if you're getting it a bit later than usual. It's usually like kind of an early to mid game item. And then it's just a pile of stats really. Like the upgraded version of this does have like a passive that gives you a health shield similar to Kepri, but it's really a small amount of utility. It's mostly just a raw pile of stats, Hide of the Urchin. Jade Emperor's Crown, I was considering whether to even put this one on the tank items list, to be honest, because it'll also be on the bruiser items list. There will be a couple from the tank items that will also appear on the bruiser items because they're kind of like a hybrid of both. This is one of them. Generally built earlier in the game, similar to around when you will build Sovereignty. You know, this item kind of competes directly with Sovereignty because Sovereignty increases your teammates' protections. Jade Emperor's Crown reduces the enemy's power, so it achieves the same goal in terms of making the enemies deal less damage to your teammates. Generally built early game, kind of like right after your Gauntlet of Thieves, potentially. So like somewhere around where you would build Breastplate, maybe slightly later. And then in terms of stats utility, the power reduction is super nice. So we'll put the utility like somewhere around the same level as Hide the Nemean Lion. Lono's Mask, interesting one. I was considering not including this one either, but I thought, you know what, let's do it. In terms of early late, you probably build this like mid to late game, I would say, on like any character you are going to build it on, which is generally no one, but like you can build it. In terms of stats utility, it's probably mostly utility actually, because it does change your playstyle a lot with the way it kind of affects how much power and how much healing and how much protections you have. So we'll put the utility down like somewhere here. Magi's Cloak, one of the only defense items you actually buy on squishies sometimes. Generally built late game, just if you're having trouble with CC, you pick up a Magi's in like your 4th, 5th, or 6th slot, and you're pretty happy about it, especially on like squishies. And then in terms of stats utility, the stats on it aren't great. It does have a lot of health, but the protection value on it's very low. You're mostly buying this for the passive, so we'll put it like fairly far down utility, because realistically, if you're a squishy, you're just buying Magi's Cloak for the passive mostly. Like the health is nice and all, but you're mostly buying it for the passive. Mail of Renewal. Or Mantle of Discord, because I just picked up Mantle of Discord and not Mail of Renewal apparently. Let's do Mantle of Discord. So generally built late game, you know, 5th or 6th slot. Kind of an expensive luxury item, but a very powerful one for sure. In terms of stats utility, it's like some utility. The passive is pretty underrated actually. You know, stun everyone around you, gain CC immunity when you get low. It's kind of a little bit similar to a Magi's Cloak in a way. But also the raw stats on the item are just good, you know, 60 of each protections is always going to be solid, plus a little bit of cooldown reduction. So it definitely has some utility, more so than like Bulwark of Hope, for example. Probably on a similar level to Hide the Nemean Lion, actually. So maybe we put Mantle like here or something like that. Okay, now let's actually do Mail of Renewal. So they reworked this item, didn't they? I feel like it's not that good right now, but I feel like this item's generally built kind of like mid-game-ish. You know, you're kind of getting online when you want a little bit of health and a little bit of healing, that kind of stuff, like around the mid-game. And then in terms of stats utility, it's mostly a utility item, I would say, like skews to utility for sure, because like the passive is a big part of the reason you buy the item, which is like a bunch of healing and extra protections and stuff like that. The base stats on the item aren't great for the cost. You're mostly buying this for the passive. So we'll put it a little bit further down in terms of utility, somewhere around there. Mystical Mail, once again, this will probably be on the bruiser items list, but I thought I'd put it on the tank items list as well, because it kind of is a tank item. You're building this very early, you're building it in the same slot you'll build Breastplate, so we'll put it just like directly under Breastplate. I think that makes sense. You build these like, you know, you build these in solo, you either rush Breastplate or you rush Mystical. They're built in like the same slot. In fact, I would say Mystical's even slightly more early game because you can pick up Breastplate later in your build and feel okay about it, whereas Mystical you kind of have to buy first or second item or you basically shouldn't even be buying it. And then stats utility, it's actually like fairly utility based. The stats on Mystical Mail aren't amazing for the cost, but obviously that insane passive is the reason people buy it, so I think we put it like further down in utility, somewhere around there. Oni Hunter's Garb, one of my favorite defense items. This is usually my go-to on solo laners when I need magical defense because I'm often like diving 3 people and I get full value from the passive. Which, speaking of the passive, is very strong, so we're probably going to put this like a little bit further down towards utility. And then in terms of early late game, it's built generally late, around where I will build a Bulwark. You know, when I'm looking to get my magical defense online, if the mid lane is giving me trouble as a solo laner, I'll buy some magical defense, and I would usually like build it in a similar place I would build Bulwark, so we'll drop that there. Pestilence, generally built around the same time you buy Contagion, maybe slightly later because it's a magical defense item, but around the same time. And then honestly, it's like, they're just duplicates of each other. So we'll probably just put these two like on top of each other. So something like that, just so you can see each one. But these two, they're really just on top of each other. They're basically the same item, but one's physical, one's magical. We have Pridwin, another one of my favorite items. I love building this on gods that it can actually work on. Generally, it's more of a late game item, because similar to Hide the Nemean Lion, you need protections already to make good use of the Pridwin passive, because it scales off of your protections from items. So generally more late game, somewhere around where you would build Nemean and Discord and that kind of stuff, like 5th or 6th item. And then in terms of stats utility, let's be real, it's just like utility heavy, really, Pridwin. The base stats on the item are very bad for the cost. I mean, it does have like cooldown reduction, I guess, so maybe I'll move it up slightly. 20% cooldown is nothing to laugh at. But like, you're mainly buying this for that passive, you know, the super strong damage shield after you ult, so we'll put it like there. Relic Dagger, so generally built fairly early game, you know, early to mid game. Second, third, fourth slot is generally when you're buying Relic Dagger. And then in terms of stats utility, it's got a fair bit of utility actually. You know, it does have like good health, good, I think it has like CCR or CDR, one of the two. But also that Relic passive cooldown reduction is super nice as well. So we'll put this one slightly towards utility, I would say. Shield of Regrowth. So generally built kind of mid-game on very specific characters like Hercules and Chang'e and stuff like that. And then it's mostly utility based, I would say. Because with Shield of Regrowth, like, yeah, it has 300 health on it, which is pretty nice, and like a little bit of regen stats, but mostly you're just buying this as a passive to be able to zoom around and stuff like that, so I'd say it's mostly utility based. Shogun's Kusari, so once again, I would build it in a similar spot to where I would build all of these magical defense items, like Genji's Guard, Bulwark, Oni Hunters, that kind of stuff. I generally just buy my magical defense in like 4th or 5th slot, which is around where these ones should be. And then in terms of stats versus utility for the Shogun's Kusari, I would say it skews slightly towards utility because that attack speed aura for the passive is like super nice for your teammates, so we'll put it like right there. Sovereignty, generally built early. In the same slot you will build Jade Emperor's Crown, and the same slot solo laners will build like Breastplate of Valor, so somewhere around here. And then it's like mostly stats, I would say, because the passive aura is like, yeah, it's a little bit of HP 5 and a little bit of protection to your teammates, but it's mostly a pile of stats, this item, for like supports to get like tanky early. It's probably on a similar level of stats utility to Heartward, considering they're basically just duplicates of each other. So we'll move Heartward a little bit down, and we'll put them on a similar level. We have Spectral Armor, so this is like purely utility, right? I know it does have like decent base stats, but let's be real, you're only buying Spectral Armor if the enemy team has like a ton of crit. And also it's generally being built later in the game. You're not building Spectral Armor in your second slot like you would a Breastplate of Valor or anything like that, because people won't have crit online that early. People get crit online generally like 4th, 5th, and 6th slot, so you generally want to be building Spectral Armor also in 4th, 5th, or 6th slot to counter those crits as they come online. So like somewhere around here, I would say. And then in terms of like stats utility, it's like down here, somewhere around like that. We're running out of room down here. There's a lot of like kind of mid to late game utility based tank items that are just kind of like taking up a large portion of the chart down here. Spirit Robe is another kind of mid to late game utility heavy item. Spirit Robe is definitely more utility based than Mantle, because Mantle has better base stats, but Spirit Robe has the better passive with like the massive damage reduction and stuff like that. So, and it's also going to be like a little bit more early game than Mantle of Discord because it's cheaper, it's less of a luxury item. I think we just put it right there. Like, that's a pretty good space for it where you can still see everything and it's like mostly utility based. Stone of Gaia. So this one you build early, you build it in solo lane, you build it where you would build your breastplate, stuff like that. So it's somewhere around here. And it's mostly utility. I'm not going to put it all the way down because it does have 400 health on it. You know, 400 health is nothing to scoff at. That'll definitely give you a lot of raw stats. So I'm not going to put it all the way to the bottom, but you also really like the Stone of Gaia passive. You know, you're often buying it for the passive on characters like King Arthur and stuff that have no innate sustain. Talisman of Energy. I hate this item. Don't buy it. I'm kidding. It's not a terrible item. I just really dislike it. I prefer Shoguns. In terms of where you would build it, it's in a similar place to where you would build all these magical defense items, really. Like, generally as a solo laner, you just build your build, and then once you get to 4th or 5th item, you pick up one of these magical defense items that are like these 5, and then you just kind of roll with that. So you generally build it in like a similar place. In terms of utility-based stats, it's probably somewhere in the middle. You know, the passive is nice, but the base stats are also solid. We'll just drop it like there. And finally, we have the 2 blades. These will probably also appear in the Bruiser items video, most likely. Winged Blade. So generally built like mid-game, I would say, Winged Blade. You're not rushing it, but you're also not waiting till late game to buy it. You know, if you want a Winged Blade, you want a Winged Blade, and you'll be getting it like fairly early in your build, but not like first item or anything. So probably somewhere around here. And then it's mostly utility-based. You know, you're buying this for the anti-slow passive. It does have like fairly good base stats on the item, like some magical protections and a lot of health, but you're mostly buying this for the utility, I would say. And in terms of Witchblade, it's a similar story. You know, you're mostly buying it for the anti-attack speed aura, but it does have like some base stats as well. In terms of early late, generally I feel like you're building Witchblade a little bit later than you will build Wingblade because people's attack speed isn't online like super early in the game, so maybe we'll drop Witchblade like somewhere over here. You can just about see that that's Magi's Blessing underneath there. And yeah, that's the entire tank items alignment chart. Obviously, we have a big cluster here of like mid to late game utility based items. That feels like generally what tank items are aiming to be. And then you have some of your early game stuff where you build like their first item rushes in solo or support. You know, you rush Thebes in support, you rush like Mystical, Gaia, breastplate and stuff like that in solo, and then generally like sovereignty, Jade Empress Crown, Relic Dagger, that kind of stuff, like second or third item as supports. And yeah, then over here you've got like your kind of pick one of magical defense items for us all, and in like your 4th or 5th slot you'll buy Bulwark, you'll buy Shoguns, you'll buy Onis, depending on what you feel like and what's your preference. And then you've just got your generally like sort of mid to late game utility based items you can pick up in most builds, like Spirit Robe, like Pridwin, you know, Shield of Regrowth on certain characters, things like that. So yeah, pretty interesting. Hopefully you learned something from this alignment chart in terms of improving your builds and things like that. And be sure to stick around for the final alignment chart video that will be coming out fairly soon, which will be the bruiser items. So items that have like a little bit of tank stats, a little bit of damage stats. You kind of build them on hybrids, you know. You build them on like assassins, you build them on like kind of damage based mages like Jean-Qui, you build them on like warriors from solo if you want to be more aggressive, stuff like that. So yeah, be sure to stick around for that one, subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss it, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.